Well, weak people are a problem. And I don't mean physically weak, I mean cowardly, let's say, and deceitful, because I'm thinking it more in terms of moral weakness. Well, there's a variety of reasons. First of all, if you can't support your own weight, let's say, then someone else has to do it, and that's not good. And then if you don't pick a forthright and useful and noble pathway through life, then you'll become bitter and too hurt by the tragedy of existence, and then you tend to seek your revenge wherever you can get it, and that's not good. So it's a mistake on all fronts. It's not good for you, it's not good for your family, it's not good for the community. It's certainly not a good medium to long-term strategy, because life is very, very difficult. You know, the best people I've ever met are dangerous people, but they keep themselves in check. I met Jocko Willink. He's a good example. I mean, Willink was the commander in Ramada, I think, and you know, you can say what you want about American military involvement. It has nothing to do with that, really, not at this level of analysis. He's a tough guy.
I follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, so you know.
He gets up every morning at 5:30, 4:30.
He's a tough guy. He told me quite straightforwardly that he was one of those kids that as an adolescent could have gone either way, right? Yeah. He could have been a highly successful street criminal.
Yeah, probably.
Right, but yeah, probably. Well, you can see it. But he decided not to do that. And you know, he's very, I would say
he was a SEAL, right?
Mm-hmm, that's right. And he's psychophysiologically intimidating. He's a big guy. You can tell he knows how to use it, and you can tell he used it.
Yeah.
But as far as I can tell, he's a good person. And that's actually, all of that capacity for mayhem is part of what makes him a good person. Yeah. And people know that. That's why they're listening to him. Yeah. And like I said, the other people I've met the men I've met who are good men, they're all like that. They're all dangerous. In the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter's obviously the hero of the story, but he's touched by malevolence, right? The only reason he can stand up against evil is because there's some evil in him that he's incorporated, essentially. Well, that's exactly right. The persona, if you're a persona, then you're an obedient citizen. But the problem with being an obedient citizen is that if the society tells you to march the Jews off to the death camp, for example, and you're obedient, then that's what you'll do. And it isn't like society is civilized and then all of a sudden you're performing some act of atrocity. That isn't how it works. It's like you're obedient citizen and then you're asked to violate your conscience a little bit.
Yeah.
And you have to, because you don't have anything other than that persona. And that's obedience. And so a little more obedience is demanded. You say, okay, well, and then you're a little bent, because the society is becoming a little bent, and then you're a little weaker. Then you're asked to violate your conscience a little bit more, and you think, well, there's a little less of me, and the pressure's on a little more, and I could have said no before, but I didn't. So you say yes again, then you say yes again, and then you have a society where 1/3 of the population is informing on the other 2/3. It's hell. It's like, well, so how do you say no? Well, that's the shadow. It's like, and see, the reason that the video I did about Bill C-16 and its compelled speech provisions went viral was because I said no. I didn't say it casually. What I meant was, there isn't anything that you can do to me that I can imagine that will force me to utter the words that you want me to utter. Nothing. And I meant it. And when I made the video, I think people could actually tell that I meant it. And so I took this abstract problem and made it concrete. I said, no, that's not happening. And that's part of the incorporation of the shadow.
But in this regard, the shadow is actually benevolent, not malevolent.
Well, once it's incorporated. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah. And I don't know what to make of that in its entirety, because it sort of means that it means something like, because one of the old metaphysical problems is, why would God allow evil into the world? I think, well, maybe God didn't allow evil into the world. Maybe God allowed the possibility of evil into the world. That's different. And maybe the world with the possibility of evil is actually a better world than the world without the possibility of evil. It's something like that, you know, in that maybe a man is better when he's a dangerous man who's being good than he would be if he was just a good man who wasn't capable of being dangerous. And I believe that, because the best men that I've ever met are very dangerous men. You don't mess with them.
Yeah.
So, and you know that as soon as you meet them.
Do you think weak men can be virtuous?
No. If you don't have the courage to commit a crime, it doesn't mean you're moral for not doing it. It just means you're afraid You can see this, I suppose, to some degree in mob violence. People will riot because they don't think they'll get caught. And so they're not law-abiding under normal circumstances because they're moral. They're law-abiding because they're afraid of punishment. And so Nietzsche was very careful to distinguish mere obedience from morality. And he thought of obedience not always as a form of cowardice, because it can also be a source of discipline, but not committing a crime because you're too afraid to. I mean, it's probably better than committing a crime, but it doesn't speak to the essence of morality. You know, and I've talked a fair bit about this, is that there's a certain utility in being able to do virtually anything and then to control yourself. And that's something I learned in part from Nietzsche, I suppose. One of Nietzsche's most trenchant critiques of traditional morality, let's say, is that most of what passes for morality isn't morality. It's just cowardice. It's not that I'm a good person and I don't hurt you. It's that I'm afraid to hurt you. And because I don't want to admit that I'm afraid to hurt you, then I say I'm moral, because then I can mask my essential fear and cowardice in a guise of morality. And that happens far more often than you would think, because harmless and moral are by no means the same thing. So some of what you're burning off, you can sit, and this is where Freud was such a genius, I think, is because he concentrated on aggression and sexuality, which are perhaps the two most difficult parts of a personality to integrate. Said that hyper-simplified morality stops you from tapping into deeper recesses of your psyche. It's partly because they're primal forces. It's not surprising that you don't want to have anything to do with them, that you stay away from situations where they might make themselves manifest. But the problem is, by denying the worst in yourself in that manner, suppressing it, you preclude the possibility of the best. Because no one can be a good person without integrating their capacity for aggression. Because without that capacity for aggression, you cannot say no. Because no means, if you really say it, no means there isn't anything that you can do to me that will make me change my mind. Or conversely, it means I will play for higher stakes than you will. And unless you've got your aggression integrated, there isn't a chance you can say that. And if you did, no one would take you seriously, because they'd know it was just a show. So one of the most useful things that Jung did, I think, was to work on this idea of the integration of the shadow, because he was really interested in the idea of evil, right? Especially working with trying to parcel out what happened in Nazi Germany and during the Second World War. What do you do with the part of you that's aggressive and potentially malevolent? Do you just crush it? That's the superego response in some sense. Do you just put it behind you, so to speak? Is that a possibility? Or do you admit to its existence and bring it into the game? And that's, see, for Freud, in some sense, morality was superego clamping down on the id. And they were fundamentally opposed. Both Jung and Piaget had a different idea, and I think they were right. It's like, no, you invite the bad guys out to play. And so you're an aggressive hockey player. But it's disciplined aggression. That gives you access to a whole sorts of energy you wouldn't otherwise have. And then with regards to sexuality, it's like, well, untrammeled promiscuity doesn't constitute a virtue, but neither does unavoidable virginity, right? In fact, I think that's worse, because it also masks itself with virtue. It's like, well, you should be able to do things that you wouldn't do. That's like the definition of a genuinely moral person.